Yo, once again, we're going to be talking about a lot of the teams that appeared in this last week of VGC. We have quite a few. Notably, we have the Sacramento regionals happening. We have a few different online tours that we'll be covering as well, along with one, most notably hosted by Japan. So we get another really good way to look into the East meta a bit, and it's bigger than the one we talked about before last week, where it was a smaller scale tournament. This is the biggest online Japan tournament we've seen in this is a long time with Liberty No and Terra Run. So we're gonna go over that as well, as long with Sacramento and some other prep tournaments that happen. First of all, we'll go over the Glizzy Tour, which there's not too much to talk about for the Glizzy Tour. We see a lot of the approach with James Beck's team from the Peoria regionals with the Water, Orgerpon, the Torn, Chempao, Goldango. I mean the Harknai, not Chempao. I was looking at the first one. But notably the winning team, and we'll actually look at this real quick from Violet, use Okidogi. And the cool thing about Okidogi is one of the flaws Ogerpon has is it's pretty vulnerable to Intimidate when you're not using the main grass form, which no one really does. So using Okidogi to take advantage of the guard dog actually creates some interesting scenarios. And also notably, we see Fluttermane with Taunt Trick Room. And I think this is actually a pretty cool option. Even though he doesn't really have a way to set up Trick Room, it's more this for counter Trick Room. Because of this team, this doesn't have the defensive profile to deal with a team once it's in Trick Room. Having counter Trick Room like that and having Taunt as well actually makes it pretty reasonable to handle those options. And not to mention having Dazzling Gleam, Shadow Ball makes Fluttermane actually have a decent profile into a lot of the metagame already. So you don't really need the other moves as much. Sure, losing Protect kind of stinks a little bit, but you can get away with it honestly with Fluttermane. I wouldn't mind in some senses seeing sets like Icy Wind Trick Room, so you don't have to, so you can play both sides of the coin, so you still get to take advantage of your booster speed Fluttermane a little bit better. But in general, it's still a very strong set, and I think having Trick Room over Protect is reasonable, especially if you see into harder Trick Room comps. The hard Trick Room or Tailwind comps both do not like the reversal Trick Room. So that is something that can actually create favorable matchups, and we saw a little bit there with some of the other teams here. There's a lot of Tailwind pressure, so having that reversal Trick Room made a pretty good situation. And then we'll talk about the Lily Regional Tournament. This one's this Iron Bundle box, which, again, not too crazy by any means, but Bundle box plus Heart Flame, Ogerpon. You just have bundles, this very general good Pokemon, and the Pokemon we're going to see a lot this format, because Bundle kind of had a dip in Reg D and Reg C, but Bundle actually has this benefit in this format where there's so many grass types, so many flying types. Landorus is always running Terra Flying. In Bundle, this operates very well in all those. In Bundle with Freeze Dry, this Oko's Ogerpon Wellspring, it still hits it super effectively even if it Terras. So that makes Bundle a general very good Pokemon in this format, and has improved quite considerably. And then the next bit we'll be going over is actually the team from the Liberty No tournament, which we see Rosencrantz, Habuki, SADGE, Gorokasuki, Tayo, Yujiro, Onpon, and Shu Poke. And there's a lot of notable things to talk about. First of all, the Clefairy plus this is a grass type Ogerpon in second place. This is not a visual mistake. They are using Choice Band Ogerpon with Defiant. We didn't get to see too much of this team in the tournament ultimately, but it is very interesting in that sense as well. And you also get to see the Goldango, the Hisuian Arcanine, Torn, a lot of very cool concepts. Tayo with a kind of simple Chempao D-Knight core, but with Fair Giraffe. Yujiro with the Lando Iron Hands, Chempao stuff. Onpon with an interesting team as well, bringing back Talonflame. Talonflame has some benefits over Torn, having a 100% accurate flying type move that is physical, which actually does matter in some scenarios. And then also this having Goldango too, right? Plus Ogerpon Wellspring, a very scary combination to deal with. This Steel type plus Ogerpon form that does redirection for it has proven to be a very successful combination, because you can use your Ogerpon Wellspring to move away the Landorus that is only using Stomping Tantrum now, really. So you can get away from that Stomping Tantrum, and this all of a sudden now your Goldango that sweeps even in front of a Lando a little bit better. So there's ideas like that that make it pretty good. Heatran as well, you can redirect the Earth Power, and you can Terra Dragon on your Goldango, and that's a very scary combination for sure. We also see concepts like Indeedee Torn, which Indeedee plus offense mons is a concept that's old as time, but is kind of underused in this format a little bit, because Indeedee actually acts as a buffer, as it stops Trick Room really well, and it also stops Priority really well, and provides redirection support. So it provides a lot for your team in one Pokemon, so that's a pretty good option in general now too, and it's very good to take advantage of that. And now we got Goro Kisuke with the Chiyu Gudra, and then we have a more standard Torn Hisuian Arcanine box that we saw back in Regulation D. Yeah, notably we saw this team in the final match. As you can see, it's once again choosing the Terra Fairy Arcanine, choosing the Ogerpon, Terra Steel Goldango notably instead of the Terra Dragon set that's beginning to catch on a little bit, using Steel types with Terra Dragon. And then also Terra Ghost Torn with Citrus Berry. You got Iron Hands with the Terra Water, Chiyu with Terra Ghost, and notably a Focus Sash as well. Focus Sash Chiyu is pretty good because like it allows you to this quick Heat Wave into Ogerpon Wellspring and not worry about it that's KOing you with an Ivy Cudgel, so you're allowed to quick your buttons a lot easier. And on the other side, we saw a very interesting combination. And the problem with this team is ultimately, as we saw in the final matchup, it didn't really have a way to deal with Goldango outside of Heatran. But the Heatran that's got like destroyed by the Ogerpon, it got destroyed by the Iron Hands. Like he would go, there was a game 2 where he tried to go for Grass Terra with his Ogerpon as a way to KO Goldango, but Goldango just lived easily, so it couldn't even get that done too well. But yeah, overall a very interesting team though, with the Choice Band Ogerpon, this pure damage. And Choice Band Ogerpon has an interesting advantage over using like Dragonite with Chien-Pao, for example. Because of this, how Defiant works and how normally how you deal with a Chien-Pao, right? You just intimidate a little bit, you use a bit of rotation, but Ogerpon's generally like pretty good into that because of the Defiant ability. So that can actually create a little bit of an advantage that Dragonite doesn't have. Of course, it does have a lot of disadvantages compared to Dragonite, where it's just like, it's not... There's a lot more ways to stop an Ogerpon than there is a Dragonite, as there's this like, one... Dragonite can hit more things and has a much wider coverage pool than an Ogerpon possibly can have. And as we see here, this Ogerpon is only running Grass type moves. It's Horn Leech, Wood Hammer, Grassy Glide, and Ivy Cudgel. Like, not having that coverage anywhere on that set is one of the main weaknesses of normal Ogerpon set. And that definitely does show up, especially into this matchup where there's a Goldango. And even if you had Stomping Tantrum, that wouldn't KO either. So it's like a little tough to play in that sense. A little tough to play. But cool to see it make a top 2. Grass Spam is definitely very, very scary. And yeah, we see this set where there's Tayo, where he just has those. Well, we actually do have a bit of a dock that we can look at. We saw NJ actually went undefeated, so we'll talk about his team real quick too. NJ ran a team with like the screens plus Okidogi. And this is a very scary combination of how you play Okidogi. It's because you just have so much bulk between Okidogi and Grim. And unlike Annihilate, and this is a big part where we didn't play Annihilate plus screens too often in the early regulations, is because Annihilate this has such a bad default defensive typing. But Okidogi's defensive typing, Poison Fighting, is actually like weirdly good. And thanks to the offensive pressure it puts on with like Gunk Shot and Drain Punch, it has a lot of like base power immediately. So even if you only need to like bulk up once to start really doing damage on people, and you don't actually need as many bulk ups to really get the max effect out of your Okidogi. And that is very important to making this team work. And it ultimately went undefeated in Swiss, even though it did end up falling off as it got into the top cut rounds, but still notable to talk about as well. And we'll also talk about Terran. He was a 2 seed. We'll talk about him real quick. Which this was a less of an interesting team, but it does do something very interesting, and that's having a Mungus on Torn comps. That has been kind of foregoed. Amoonguss has like generally fallen off on like a lot of concepts right now, and we see this even though he is using Grass Spam, he has chosen to use Amoonguss anyways, and also chose an interesting option in Substitute. And Substitute plants you with a lot of general value as Substitute. This prevents Intimidate from really working into you as well, because like the best way to deal with an Ogerpon of the Heartflame variety is when you just Intim rotate it. Its boost doesn't matter if you just rotate enough. But Substitute, you can Substitute early, and then all of a sudden you get the boost, and it's like they can't stop your boost anymore, and they can't just like Intim rotate through you too easily, and especially with options like Fluttermane, we see like Sunny Day on the Torn. That's a lot of fire damage that is very, very hard to deal with. Of course, this team does have like a vulnerability. As you can see, there's a lot of flying type weaks. I mean, it is running Rillaboom against Ogerpon. So I am curious to see if like Iron Hands would be a potential good option instead of relying on the grassy spam mode. And that could be a theoretical way to change how this team operates, but still keep it like generally the same and to be mostly the same kind of effect. So that could be something to interesting to think about with it. And yeah, that's really the teams. Yeah, we'll pull up SIG teams. I think we looked through all of these for now. Maybe we'll look at Onpon too. I'm down to look at Onpon's team. This will be in Japanese, which is partly why I chose to look at A-Rays too. But this is the team that got top 8. We see Onpon's team. And this is Brave Bird, Tailwind, Quick Guard, Protect, Ivy Cudgel, Follow Me, and it's Nasty Plot Terror Dragon. Okay. And a bulky Dragonite set too, which is pretty interesting. Overall, pretty cool stuff. And I'll have the whole document here linked in the description so you guys can look at it on your own and see the general info of what actually did well in this tournament. You will have to use like Bulbapedia, but there is a site with Pokemon moves in other languages, and you can just use this. And this is usually how I translate moves until I like learn them better. You can just go here, and then you can try to match the kanji with what you think it is. And so you can use Pokemon Showdown, the cross-reference with the images as well, so you have a general idea what moves it could possibly be. That's usually how I go about translating moves, so you can figure that out on your own, because I can't say enough how like important the Japan circuit is to like how the West operates as well. Like as we see there was a lot of American Western players play in this tournament as well, but there's so many people who just look at these tours and take like a lot of influence of what they do in regionals. So being able to use like translation tools and using the tools you get to like really understand what is actually happening in the overall metagame, even out east, it's very important to allow you to really make the right calls when you go into events overall. And yeah, and finally we're going to talk about the most notable event, and that is Sacramento Regionals. And I saved this one a bit because there is quite a few teams we have to talk about. Quite a few. And we'll be going a bit lower with this one as it is a regional championship. We will be starting a little bit lower. See, let's start through 7-2. Yep, there we go. We had Kalen Brown, Montana Molt. We do get to see an Empoleon in Top Cut, which is pretty cool. Empoleon, while not the greatest Pokemon in the world, it does have like a bunch of cool toolbox options now that it's competitive. This being able to scare out certain things a bit better. This one, of course, not using a water type move, but it is using a bit of the utility pretty well, as you have the Roaring Moon to set tail in, and you have like the Yawn on Empoleon, which is pretty interesting. But more importantly, this Ice Beam can KO a Landorus even through it going Terra Flying, which is pretty cool. I do kind of feel a bit begrudged that it doesn't have a water type move. I feel like a water type move is more valuable than Flash Cannon in my opinion, but it's fair. Like I would love to see a water move on it or over Yawn, but I get it for sure. Overall, a pretty cool team, and cool to see it. Empoleon getting the job done and actually getting Top Cut and making it to day 2. And then see the Iron Bundles. We see Sinisha Box doing decently. Torkoal, Trick Room stuff. No surprise there. Also Blood Moon on Trick Room stuff. This kind of fell off. It didn't do as well as it did in like Peoria. Also, we see an interesting team. This is kind of bizarre. He's using Wheezing Galar with Dozo Tatsu, which I guess is fair because if you have Wheezing Galar out, you're not going to have the Dozo Tatsu out anyways. And also using Grass Defiant Ogerpon to stop like intimidating. Very interesting team. It does seem a bit bizarre to me, but taking advantage of the play rough and fairy typing and the unique bulk and the unique type advantage makes for a very interesting combination. Also using a pretty cool set, and I think Terra Dragging Dondozo is actually very good in this format, as like Dozo can KO Fluttermane outright, and if you can KO the main fairy type in the format, Dragon is actually a very safe Terra. And Dondozo is something that is capable of that with Wave Crash, though you do have to be a little bit careful. Sometimes that can like backfire a little bit on you. And we also get to see Defiant. Defiant is very cool on Ogerpon next to Roaring Moon, and it's like a very interesting combination. I am curious to know if it was like worth it for him, or if he would have went Ogerpon Heart Flame instead, and if he had to run it back. But yeah, I do think Ogerpon Defiant is a little underrated. Just a little bit. It's not as bad as people make it out to be, and it's cool to see it go top 32. And we also get to see the Tyranitar team. We'll go over this team when we get up a bit, because it did ultimately win the regional. So we'll talk about that then. But we got Stefan Molt with Annihilate Clefairy. I do feel like he didn't play quite optimal on the stream game versus the second place finisher, as he played mainly for like Ogerpon Clefairy and kept like swords dancing in front of a Mungus Dragonite, which I feel like is a little sus. A little sus. We did end up watching that on stream, which if you want to watch the stream where I talk about most of these things, and sometimes I'll actually record these live on stream as well. Sometimes. Then you can check out twitch.tv/atmosphere VGC, and that's an option you can get. And we also watch regionals. We watch the Japan tours there too. We watch as much Pokemon as humanly reasonable on there, and sometimes I'll even play. Sometimes. But yeah, we see Clefairy, Terra Steel, we see Annihilate, Ogerpon, Heatran, Iron Bundle, and Landorus, and it's a pretty cool team. Bundle, Terra Fairy, Heatran is very hard to deal with. Bundle is also a very nice Pokemon too. I do kind of question Annihilate a little bit. I don't feel like Annihilate is as active as a threat here with this kind of team, but I do feel like it is bulky enough with like Clef if you like play it right. Because like in theory, how you want to deal with Clef is like always targeting the Clef, but if you're always targeting the Clef, you're giving Annihilate a lot of times this quick bulk ups anyways, so like it is still a decent idea. I don't know if it's like worth too much next to it, but like, I do question maybe Okadogi could have been better here, but Annihilate is definitely a very sound mon in itself, and also operates better into Dragonite, even though he did ultimately lose to Dragonite on stream even with it, as it was this quick like aerial ace and stuff too. And he was like leading Ogerpon Wellspring, which honestly didn't do anything into it. But yeah, that's enough for that team. We also saw a few Weezing concepts, which I do believe Kyle... This was the Kyle one too, right? Yeah. We saw Kyle on stream 2 times, and he used an interesting concept with Ability Shield, so he could still get the Intimidate while under neutralizing gas. That also allows you to Intimidate Landorus, which was pretty neat. He did go 6-3. Did this want to mention that, and it's a similar concept we're seeing a bit. Is like neutralizing gas Weezing plus booster energy Roaring Moon with like the Breaking Swipes knockoff is actually being the more common set recently, we've noticed, and using Terra Poison as well. And Terra Poison is a very good defensive typing. There's not many things that have poison types in this metagame. Like you can use like Landorus to hit it, but like you have Breaking Swipe's defensively stalling that out a bit better. So this is a very cool team as well. I do feel like another match we saw on stream where I was just like, oh, he brought the Weezing in, but his Weezing could not hit the Golengo, and it was kind of awkward. But yeah, that's it for that team. And now we can look at the top 8 teams, and we got a few interesting ones. We got a default kind of Snowbox with Clippers here, which really, this is, if you ask me what a Snowbox would look like, this is kind of what a Snowbox is. You have the Defiant mode, you have the Ogerpon with the redirection support, Ninetales for the screens. You have a bunch of decent enough defensive Pokemon that are bulky enough and strong enough on their own to actually get through a lot of matchups. So it makes for a very like well-rounded utility core. And we actually see a couple of them. We see another one, but this one using the more Japan variation of it, where they use Baxcalibur. If you haven't been following the Japanese ladder, this is part of why I think it's important to follow Japan and follow as many metagames as possible. Ninetales Bax is a concept that came from Japan, really, and also had a few decent performances, like with Big Slim at Peoria. So it was a team that was definitely present and is something to be noticed, even though it is definitely very innovated. We saw Brian Collins, though unfortunately for him, he did end up losing his Glade, which could have helped quite considerably to actually deal with the Heatran and the matchup he lost to Rogov, and deal with some of the Snowmons a bit better too. But ultimately he did lose out on that, but he still actually fought to a very close set, though I do feel like there's a few rough spots in that for sure. But overall, a very strong team. This is basically the box you'll see of Scythe Spam. I don't know if they'll continue using Glade. They probably will for a bit longer. But it is very cool to see Glade as a Pokemon still. It did ultimately get removed. I will specify this because he named his Glade Ceruledge. You are not allowed to name your Pokemon the same name as some other Pokemon, which is a little stupid of a rule, but that is something that is important to know. That is something important to know for sure. Don't do that. Even if the nicknames are off, just don't do it. It's an outdated rule because you can have nicknames off now in Pokemon, but it is still an important one to remember. I imagine it's for like some transform shenanigans or something else stupid, but or if someone genuinely doesn't recognize what the Pokemon looks like, but yeah, do not name your Pokemon the same name, and don't do stuff like this has happened before too, is where they like name their Pokemon like Chi-Yu without the indent and like other stuff like that. They get away with it usually when it's like abbreviated. Like there was some people with shoot, let me think. The Chi-Yu example is a good example too, but you can name something like Arca or Arc and you would probably get away with it. Though I do think it's better not to create stipulations with judges where they can just remove your Pokemon, because they do punish that very seriously. So I do think that's an important thing to mention. But yeah, that is kind of the default side spam method. We also see Alberto Laura with Gastrodon. Gastrodon here walls the Urshifu out pretty well. And we see Andrew Dink, who actually went 14-0. 14-0, by the way. Though he did ultimately play a hard matchup that he did actually win in Swiss, apparently, which was pretty crazy to me when I heard about it. But we see the Trick Room Flutter, which is pretty interesting. This is the counter Trick Room. It's a concept that I used at Milwaukee Regionals. I don't know how many other people have used it since then. Though, actually at the Japan tour, there was a Trick Room Choice Specs 1-2, I believe. But yeah, the idea behind it is like, it's not necessarily for the Trick Room scenario, but it's for acting as a counter. Like if your opponent tried to play aggressively with Tailwind or try to like take a speed advantage on you, you can just Trick Room with like rotation on it, and it's like pretty good to stop that. And also you can't get Sucker Punch when you're clicking Trick Room, and that's a pretty notable thing. It's a concept that I use for like Cali Shadow back in Sword and Shield, because like there's a lot of Cali teams, and if I could just stop the Trick Room for one turn, it was worth sometimes clicking Trick Room, though I rarely ever did. But it did create some other, of course back then there was some value of like Max Guard too, but you know, that's another thing really. We do not have Max Guard anymore, so this is for the Trick Room option to avoid Sucker Punch. And then we get Shane Gaffney, who had a very bulky Hisuian Arcanine that ultimately like backfired on him a little bit, but he did use an interesting set in Calm Mind, Flutter Mane, so we'll just mention that quickly. And also the Rain Dance Torn on this one. We notice sometimes they choose Rain Dance for their Ogerpon, sometimes they choose Shunny Day. So this one interesting, having Rain Dance with 2 fire types, which I found like very surprising. But yeah, then we got Rogob with like kind of the default Snow Paste, but with some interesting options like Fast Caliber gains Swords Dance and Scale Shot. Scale Shot boosts speed, loaded dice guarantees the hits, so you always get enough Scale Shots in, making a very scary Pokemon at times. But the main notable things I honestly think, and what really carried him throughout the top cut, is when he was like just hitting his Magma Storms and just getting those Magma Storms off. And he honestly could have made finals if he hit enough Magma Storms. Of course he did. You can only expect to hit so many, and he hit all of them in top 8, which helped him quite considerably. But unfortunately for him, he did not actually get there in the end in his top 4 set. Then finally we have like Riley and Michael Zhang. Riley actually brings us a lot of like very cool options, like notably the AV Dragonite, and this kind of allows you to play this in between Inner Focus and Multiscale. Like there was a lot of multi-scale Dragonite with Choice Band, Terry E-Speed, but it's kind of fallen out of favor because it's so weak into Fake Out and this Intim rotation. So Inner Focus has become the main set, but because Inner Focus is the main set, there was generally a problem where these Dragonites will just die. They'll just be gone. Even if they had a good matchup into someone's theoretically, they would just go down, and you wouldn't be able to actually take advantage of Dragonite's like great defensive typing and great offensive typing for this metagame. And we saw numerous times on stream how like Riley could just stick his Dragonite on the field and it'll just stay there, and it'll just spam Aerial Ace, E-Speed, and sometimes even use Thunder Punch for the Landorus when it would Terrasilize. And that gave it like enough value to like always be worth something, and then in front of Heatran could quick Stomping and then not have to worry about the Heatran protecting and then tearing if it sees Stomping or not. So like it creates a lot more pins when you're able to rotate your moves and able to like adjust your options. We saw this a bit on stream as well, where like players would just like be locked into their choice band, and because they're locked in their choice band, not able to change their moves, they would just get put into these awkward pinning positions where they actually can't do anything, even though their Dragonite like theoretically would work in that scenario. So I really love that AV set. I'm kind of surprised he has Grass Knot, but it is pretty notable as well. Also choosing Follow Me on Ogerpon, and this is one of my favorite ways to play Ogerpon Heart Flame. I know a lot of people are using Swords Dance, but Ogerpon is still just a very bulky Pokemon, and since you can use the attack boost to heal you with Horn Leech, it actually adds a very annoying element to it, where it can take advantage of the redirection and it's already great bulk, but also uses healing to make it Follow Me user that can live deceptively long, even though it isn't like Ogerpon Wellspring levels because of this Bedef boost, but it still has the stats to live, and when you add the attack boost in Terra, it can both kill and then act as like a true redirector simultaneously. And since he has King Gambit with the Terra Dragon, we see this a lot. Steel types with Terra Dragon is definitely the wave. It just adds a lot of nuance and annoyance to the team. And the final team we have to talk about is actually Michael Zhang and the team that ultimately won. You notice this is a very interesting team. I did this realize on stream a little bit ago that Moonblast does not make you immune to, Bulletproof does not make you immune to Moonblast. And I feel like an idiot for thinking that. Because like I saw chestnuts earlier that were running Bulletproof and I was like, oh, it's probably immune to Moonblast, right? That's why you would run it. But it was actually this Terra Fire chestnuts with Iron Defense Body Press. But yeah. Kommo and why Kommo is so great, and we saw this in the finals match. Kommo, outside of Pokemon that are physical, right? The best way to deal with Kommo is mons like Flutter Mane, but you can go like Terra Steel to deal with Flutter, and you can also just like be a generally bulky Pokemon. So sometimes that's the base typing alone. Like we saw this in the Riley matchup. He had Urshifu, but it couldn't deal with Kommo pre-Terra. He had Ogerpon, it can't deal with Kommo pre-Terra. King Gambit can't deal with Kommo pre-Terra. Chempel can, but Chempel struggles into the Arcanine with Will-O-Wisp and Flare Blitz. So Kommo can actually get it removed pretty easily. And then like the Dragonite, like, oh, it has Aerial. Aerial Ace is a very weak move, so it actually doesn't hit Kommo that hard at all. So it only needs one Iron Defense to live. And because of Kommo's bulk profile, and this is the thing that pushes it ahead over other Iron Defense users, it's a Dragon Fighting type, and this makes it not weak to Sacred Sword. Like, we see this with Heatran when they try to run Iron Defense sets, and we see this with, let me think, not this Heatran, we saw this with Garganacl, right? They would be forced in the Terra the minute they see a Sacred Sword user, and Sacred Sword users are too common to make those sets, like, actually, like, very viable to run. Like, Heatran still has some niche cases, Garganacl still has some niche cases, but as, like, purely a Iron Defense Body Press user, Kommo's actually like insane in this meta, and this has a lot of utility. And we see Rillaboom as well. Like, we'll talk about the Riley matchup a little bit. In theory, the best way for Riley to ever operate into this is use Amoonguss Chempal, but avoid Arcanine getting Will-O-Wisp on Chempal, avoid Arcanine getting like multiple Intimidates on Chempal, and getting enough Spore Pressure early with Amoonguss to deal with Kommo, because he is Bulletproof to be immune to the Flutter's Shadow Ball, instead of worrying about like Spore with Overcoat, right? I mean, because that's the thing, you have to maneuver on Arcanine Kommo, try to get Spore on a Kommo, and then eventually try to bring in Chien-Pao into a position where it can Ice Spinner, which that's a lot of things I just said that are all very, very hard to accomplish. And also, like, with Michael, you have the Taunt on Rillaboom to stop the Spore, potentially. You have the Arcanine has Flare Blitz, too. Like, there's a lot of ways to get around it if you want, and even like Freeze Dry Bundle, even though Bundle doesn't like naturally KO, if it's more physically bulky Amoonguss, it will KO Amoonguss pretty well, which there's a lot of physical Pokemon in this meta, so you can expect most Amoonguss to be more physically bulky. And we also see another interesting option in Terra Psychic Tyranitar that I want to talk about too. And why I think Terra Psychic Tyranitar is actually the optimal choice on Tyranitar. It's very simple. What hits Psychic types? Dark, Bug, and Ghost. What does Tyranitar's base form hit? All the dark types, because there's only Chien-Pao and Chi-Yu. Those are the best dark types in the meta. King Gambit, but then you have Low Kick for that. Right? And then if it's a bug type, those aren't real anyways, but they get hit by Rock Slide. And then finally, if they are a ghost type to hit your Psychic type Pokemon, right? You have Knockoff. Knockoff is the best way to hit ghost types imaginable. Of course, you don't hit Flutter too hard, and that could theoretically cause some problem maybe, but like, in general, Flutter wants to be Quick and Dazzle anyways into you, and Flutter actually does not match up very well into Assault Vest Tyranitar in its base form, because the Sand boost, and then you have this Bedef boost as well, so Flutter Mane cannot actually like really do much into Tyranitar in base form with those stacking together. And he does have a Hisuian Arcanine and Sand too, with the Bedef boost on that too, and his own Flutter to hit it, opposing Flutter, so he has a lot of ways to like actually deal with Flutter in annoying ways. Like, Flutter Chi-Yu theoretically beats Kommo, but because he has Tyranitar and Arcanine together, Hisui form, and gets the Sand boost, dealing with Flutter Chi-Yu is actually a lot easier in Sand, and that can create some problems. And theoretically, the most people have to actually deal with Sand in general is like Tornadus, Quaking Rain Dance, or Sunny Day. But if you have that, that's a flying type into 2 rock type Pokemons and a bundle. So that's a pretty flawed matchup in general, and that is something always going to be notable to talk about. So yeah, I do think this is the correct Terra type, even though this is the first correct Terra Psychic Pokemon we'll ever see, probably. Outside of Mons with Expanding Force or Stab, right? But this Terra Psychic, the more you think about it, is so correct, right? Like, if they're Psy Spam, right, and they have a fighting type on their Psy Spam to deal with the Tyranitar, you Terra Psychic your Tyranitar, and now you're not weak to the fighting type like Iron Hands anymore, or like Urshifu Single Strikes will still KO you with like Wicked Blow, but it's a little less common. But like Iron Hands, what would normally be a counter, even regardless of Terra when we were using Terra Flying, and this was a big part of why Tyranitar this went to the bin and nobody used Tyranitar anymore. Because even if Tyranitar was terrestrializing, it would still get destroyed by Iron Hands, and this wasn't very good. This wasn't very good at all. And Michael Zhang really just used the one set that adds a theoretical advantage to that, where you Terra Psychic. Oh look, Iron Hands is now getting hit by this Terra Psychic, Terra Blast super effectively, and it's also not able to Drain Punch anymore, and it has to rely on Wild Charge to KO you, and that's like neutral is not going to do the most damage to Tyranitar, and then Terra Blast adds up. While even though Flying resists Drain Punch, if you get Wild Charge, you're dead, so it's not as worthwhile. And the conclusion of this, I do want to actually do a little thing and talk about some like theoretical things that I think are pretty good in this metagame right now. Like, I will say immediately that I do want to mention this again, and I'll keep mentioning this most weeks. I do think Dondozo Glimmora is very strong, but I think people playing into more like theoretical pins with this kind of concept will work out pretty well. Even solo Dozo is still like decently viable, because Dozo Glim, if you look at like most of the teams in this metagame, they rely on grass types so considerably. I think Dozo Glim actually creates a lot of like theoretical pins in this metagame, so I do think that is the premier way to run Dozo Glim Tatsu. I do also want to say, I think AV Dragonite, I think proved itself enough on stream where I think it's going to be a set that like we see more going forward. I think this set was definitely the premier set of the tournament that proved itself the most, even over Kommo-o, honestly. Even though the Kommo-o definitely will have an upswing, that is something to talk about as well. And I also think, now that we saw Bulletproof, I think Overcoat and Soundproof, they also prove to be options. All of these are very good on Kommo-o. Every single one is good, and you can also use different Terras too. If you're like scared of Chi a little bit, you could use Fire, you can use Steel. Though it is notable, if you're not using Steel, you lose the Iron Head Stab. So that is a bit of a counterintuitive thing, but that can be something to think about. Because like Fire, theoretically, it means you're not really getting walled much anymore. Because you still have Body Threats of Flamethrower, though. But you get walled by like Terra Fairy Heatran, which can be a little sneaky. So that is something to think about. And other than that, that's something else notable to talk about real quick. I do think there's a lot of interest in interesting potential to like screens too. I think screens like this, not ignore the quad berry, but like this kind of screens is very good, and we saw this from NJ. But I think it's still a very good comp right now, the screens in general, and this can also be done with like Ninetales too. You see like Ninetales Okidogi, stuff like that, and I think that's a generic idea that is pretty strong right now. We are a bit lacking in like fighting types that just have like generic bulky setup utility, because Kommo actually cannot break bulk up too easily on Okidogi, because like the defense boost will just keep coming, and eventually like Okidogi actually matches up pretty well into Kommo. And also like since it's a fairy type, or both the screen users are fairy types, they kind of actually operate pretty well into this kind of concept. So that could be a potential option that we see. You'll notice I am seeing a lot of poison types, because I think like poison types in general have a lot more potential into this meta, because there's a lot of grass types. Like honestly, I could even see an Iron Moth doing well, but I don't think it's likely. I'm still a hater on that. Also, Terra Dragon Steel types. We'll look at some Steel types. We saw this with like Corviknight early format, but I think we're going to keep seeing this over and over again in this meta game. We're going to see Terra Dragon on the Goldengos. We're going to see Terra Dragons on the King Gambits, and that will continue to be a trend. I don't see any reason for that to stop, as this like Steel typing, this works so well with Dragon types, right? And this is something to keep in mind for the future too. Like even once this metagame is over, hell, we could even see Terra Dragon on Empoleon, you know? But there's a lot of steel types that really take a great advantage of the Terra Dragon. And I do think more Weezing players will show up. Weezing is not done yet. It's still just a general good Pokemon, even in both forms. Like, the Fairy type does make you a bit more vulnerable to steals, but Fairy Stab is pretty good, so it does work out decently. And I do think the premier set for Heatran is now, like, Terra Fairy as well. This is not too big of a surprise, but that is something you'll have to see quite a bit of for sure, for sure. And I do also want to mention Clefairy, I think, proved itself, and it has continued to prove itself. There will always be like 1 or 2 Clefairy players at each tournament, I believe. It may not win, but I think it will always be like an annoying threat. Friend Guard plus its general bulk is just like very solid in general, so I would expect it to like have a decent chance to this perform pretty decently at most events that you go to. Not really as an anti-meta Pokemon. This in general is just a good Pokemon. And other thing to talk about is I do think there is some more openings in Ogerpon forms. We saw in the Japan tour where they used the Defiant Ogerpon. We saw actually one in top 32 of this tournament too. But I do want to stress this. Every single Ogerpon form is a good Pokemon. Every single one. None of them are bad. Like, even the rock one. Even the rock one's a good Pokemon. The Defiant one has some utility too. Like, there's a reason to run every single Ogerpon. Of course, these two, the rock one and the default one, are going to be, like, overshadowed by a lot of people. But I do think that they are all very viable. And I think that is an important set to remember. Because, like, Ogerpon rock form, we see, like, how powerful rock types can be based on that finals. And, like, Ogerpon rock form is very good into a lot of this stuff. It's very, very good into it. And it also wins the Fire Mirror pretty well. So it's like, it's definitely there. Definitely up there. Also, funny mon, I'll mention that's really bad, but it's funny how this Iron Valiant actually kind of beats this team, and I will not elaborate on it. Anyways, but yeah, I don't think there's quite too much else to talk about this week. Rest in peace, SADGE. Gudra performed a little bit. Iron Hands still broken. Ursaluna Blood Moon did fall off a little bit this week, but I will say, just looking at this metagame, of course the rock types are a little annoying. They're a little annoying, and if they go soundproof. But there was a pretty cool Ursaluna set in the Japan tour, I believe. If I don't think I can find it too easily. But it used like Calm Mind Hyper Voice Blood Moon instead of using Earth Power. And that was a pretty cool set for sure. It's not him. Is it this guy? Oh, there's this team that was pretty funny that I'll mention briefly as well. And this will be the last team we mentioned. But they're Woshan with Choice Band and Foul Play. Yo. And yeah, I'll end stream with that. I mean, end a video with that. Let me know what you guys think of the metagame recently. There's a lot of this new trends in the meta. And we'll keep trying to do this as many weeks as possible. I know this is not Monday and this is a bit later than we were doing it before. But I do think it really is just a very, very interesting metagame. There's a lot of stuff that technically works well enough, and it's so much better than Regulation D, I'm going to be honest. Though, of course, it's going to take me a while to actually play it myself as much as I want to. Because, like, in-game, getting more Ogerpon forms, getting more legendaries, you can't even catch them in base game, oh no. But yeah, other than that, it's a pretty good format. I like it quite a bit. I think it's a lot more balanced than the formats we saw at Worlds and the format we saw up after like Regulation A. I think Regulation A was the best format, but we only got one regional. This is the best format since then, in my opinion. And hopefully don't get proven wrong in the coming weeks, you know. We're still early format. We're still pretty early. But yeah, that's it for this one. Goodbye.